And welcome into the Four Verticals Podcast, episode 126 here on this Thursday, 9/11/2025. A lot of things to cover today. Of course, you have a big weekend of college football starting tonight, and we also have a lot of games, of course, Saturday. Then we have Buccaneers Texans on Monday Night Football. We'll cover that. And, of course, with college football, we have the upset alerts, and as usual. And that'll be a start of our show. It's a bit of a shorter show. Nothing wrong about ending the week with a bit of a shorter show because we did a little bit confused. We did most of the previews for week 3 college football on Monday or Tuesday, and we're doing 2 today, upset alerts, and then Bucs Texans preview prediction that is on for Monday Night Football. If you're here to the show, welcome in. If you're new here, welcome in. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the streams, follow us on X, Twitter. If you guys know the drill, podcast feed, whatnot. Bit of a programming note. We will not have a show, traditional, we'll have a show, but won't be at the traditional time again. It'll have to be in the evening on Tuesday. That'll be the plan. At some point in the evening Tuesday, I'll determine that once we get closer. So be sure to follow the socials for more information on that as we get closer. And unlike last week, we will be bringing back the reaction show, the sort of recap on Saturday night. Hopefully, I'll get that stream probably up tomorrow so I can remind myself. So we'll be doing that Saturday night at some point. We'll see after the games are over with to react to all of them. So it won't be as jammed. So the next Tuesday's show won't be as jammed as it was on this past Tuesday. So again, I apologize for missing last week's recap, but some things kind of got on the way there. So no big deal. It's okay. But a lot to cover today. We have 2 more games to get into, and we'll do upset alerts, Bucs Texans, and whatnot. So should be a bit of a shorter show, but I think the upset alert segment could be a little bit of a last week was definitely more of a surprise Saturday. No one was really talking about those games, and everyone's talking about the big games. But I think there's some games on the upset alert list that I think, frankly, no one's really talking about that has me even more concerned. So we'll get into all of those here in just a moment. I'm really excited for this one. Notre Dame, Texas A&M. This is on the NBC Game of the Week. So we talk Black Legend Eagle. Notre Dame, according to FanDuel, not a sponsor of the show per se, but a asset we use, a research tool. The money line is 6.5 on this one for Notre Dame, home field advantage. This game probably will be the most physical game of the weekend for both sides. I'm expecting both defenses to be very, very, very good here. You have Mike Elko, Marcus Freeman, both defensive-minded head coaches sort of going against each other, at least going against each other's offenses separately. Of course, they're not going to sound like I'm talking about a UFC fight. They're not fighting each other per se, but their respective defensive minds will be used against each other's offenses, if that makes any sense. By the way, interesting, the offensive coordinators, too, matchup here for the defenses. You have Mike Denbrock at Notre Dame. You have Colin Klein, the great Colin Klein, Kansas State legend. There's the OC for Texas A&M. The keys for this game here, sort of how this game I think might be going here. I think Marcel Reed, if you're A&M, sort of the double, some of have obvious, but it's true here. A&M offensively needs to really step up, and I think it starts and ends with Marcel Reed. I think he's definitely more of a unique quarterback that A&M has that Notre Dame has not faced yet. They faced Carson Beck back week 1. Of course, they were off last week. A&M is not off the bye, which I may be hinting at towards where I'm going here at the pick. But Marcel Reed definitely, the more unique quarterback A&M has. He's more of course, a pure runner. Obviously, Notre Dame is not really going to face that this year. Maybe with USC, we'll see. But in terms of USC I guess tailing Grant at Arkansas too, but in terms of potential and overall talent, I think Marcel Reed is, at least at the moment, the most talented quarterback Notre Dame has on their schedule, at least in terms of a high level of a ceiling. Again, not including USC and Arkansas in that mix, but Marcel Reed, of course, he can run around and sort of he can do some different stuff that maybe Marcus Freeman and company are not used to seeing, or at least have not seen yet this year, even though they've only played 1 game. So that could be a challenge for them. And, of course, A&M defensively should bring it. Mike Elko taking control of the defense again this year. That's been heavily emphasized over the summer and back in the spring. So I have no fear in A&M bringing it defensively. They should. I think they should. That defense should be able to travel. I have no concerns defensively for A&M. I think for A&M, the biggest concern I do have is the offense. As much as I just talked about Marcel Reed being, a very unique quarterback that A&M has that Notre Dame will not probably face the rest of the year. Notre Dame also has a good defense and a good defensive minds over there, even though they have, staff turnover on that side of the ball. I don't fully trust Marcel Reed that much. And everyone made a big deal about, including me, about him not being at SEC Media Days, and that was a little weird because usually you do bring your starter, and there was some concern that he may not even win the starting job. Obviously, he has. This is a game that I think for Marcel Reed and that offense, they're going to have to really change people's mind, and that I think translates to either being very productive and not being the reason why you lose the game, or outright winning the game. Because a lot of folks, and I think rightfully so, are kind of out on Marcel Reed. They don't see him as much of a someone that they fear, and I think in the sense that he would, he's going to have to change those narratives either by keeping the game close and him not being the reason why they lose the game, or they go out and just win the game outright. So for A&M, I think you need Marcel Reed to be a little bit better than he was last year in all these big games, especially away from home. I mean, look at the South Carolina game last year, for example, sort of melting down. The Auburn game a few weeks later is another example of that. So for A&M, we need to see an our version of Marcel Reed that we have not seen yet. For Notre Dame, it's the offense mostly, and I think it's them to be on schedule. If CJ Carr, I know a lot of folks are still concerned about him, and of course, look, I'm not going to sit here and get mad at Bud Elliott, those guys are cover 3, but what Bud's mentioned back weeks ago, back last month about once that quarterback battle sort of lined down and ended up being CJ Carr, that I don't think Bud was wrong for saying this. Yeah, I'm sure he got what he was told was correct, that there was a lot of surprise, frankly, from the Notre Dame team, from the sources he has there up there in South Bend, and I think that's certainly something. Is it the end all be all? No, because I think CJ Carr, not necessarily he's got rid of the narrative of him, him being the starter, but there's some, caveats around it because none of the players were necessarily behind him. It's just, I think a lot of folks, given the fact that it was a battle, there's some potentially other external things going on too. And I think it's frankly for me, the disappointment, because I thought he was going to be the starter immediately. Good for him to sort of, I guess, shut down that narrative that, he's not good enough, or, he wasn't their first choice at quarterback. They should be on schedule, because if they aren't on schedule, that ground game for Notre Dame with, Love being back, this year, and he didn't have much of a factor game one, needs to be on schedule. Because if they can't get that ground game going, Texas A&M and Mike Elko can take advantage of you. And again, not to mention the uniqueness at quarterback for A&M that could spell trouble for Notre Dame, because again, it's a very unique quarterback, and they will not face that the rest of the year, more likely. So, how I think this game is going to go here. For A&M and Notre Dame, again, respectable defenses. This is a very good defensive matchup here. If you're a fan of that, personally, I'm not. For the most part, this is your game. This is your dream, if you will. Definitely taking the under in this. I know the under is, according to FanDuel, 49.5, way lower. I think this will be sort of like a lot of those NFL games you watch. If you watch the Sunday game, like I do, definitely going to be very low scoring, 17-13, very low scoring, kind of a lot of emphasis on running clock and game control. Definitely in play here. But with all that being said, with everything, everyone's making a big deal about A&M going on the road, and they should be a lot better this year and whatnot. The other, I think Notre Dame having that bye last week, because I think no one's talked about, surprisingly, even Josh Pate, who usually makes a big deal about these bye advantages. Notre Dame is off a bye, so they did not play last week, so they're rested. I think. Let me just double check that real quick, because I'm pretty sure they were off. I do not believe they played last week. At least I don't recall. So they did not play last week. So, yeah, that is factually correct. They're rested. And I feel what's also interesting here, a little bit of an interesting dynamic, is that Notre Dame, if you really think about it, they could easily go 0-2 here. Because, again, they didn't play last week, so they had Miami, they lost. Then you have Texas A&M coming to town in between the buys. There's no, sandwich G5 game in between. You could very easily start 0-2, and that's not impossible. And I said that back in the summer during our little spicy prediction segments. That was not impossible for Notre Dame to go 0-2. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Notre Dame will win this game but I do think A&M will cover. Again, I do expect this to be like a 17-13, 13-10, really low scoring and very ugly game. But I think Notre Dame being at home, they're sort of in wounded Irish mode, if you will. You have that bye week, you're rested. A&M's not. Granted, they were playing, both two G5 games, but they're not rested. They still have played more games than Notre Dame has. So, yeah, I'm taking Notre Dame to win. But I do think A&M will cover here. Again, a very low-scoring, sloppy game. And, if Notre Dame were to start 0-2, that would be, again, not out of their own possibility, but just seeing it manifest itself and it being like actually a real thing to actually witness. Boy, that will be a very interesting conversation to have about, should Notre Dame be, what's their conversation looking like potentially in the postseason, right? So we'll cross the bridge when we get there, but just something to think about. Next up here, last game we're previewing for this week. Again, all the other games that we were previewing that we were, well, at least were, I guess, enough for us to preview, like, Notre Dame, or we just did Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia. Those games, we already did those on the Tuesday show. We're saving these for this game. So we just did Notre Dame and Texas A&M. Miami, South Florida. This game is on the CW of all places, the biggest game in CW history. I never thought in my wildest dreams that the same network that was airing the old DC TV shows like The Flash and Green Arrow would be hosting a top 25 matchup on their network. Just imagine telling yourself that 10 years ago, but here we are. South Florida, Miami, a top 10, at least in our minds, a top 10 matchup. The folks are the AP, top 15 matchup, but that's okay. There's a lot of shame being thrown at the AP, and something rightfully so, but everyone else has talked about it. We're not talking about it here today. I was going to, but I was like, I probably shouldn't, because everyone else has sort of exhausted it. But this game, Miami, South Florida, obviously the spread here is really big, and let's not, sugarcoat it. I think Miami's going to win the game, but we'll circle back to that prediction in just a moment. But how would the upset happen? How would this happen? How would South Florida continue their magical run this early in the season? How would that happen? How did they make it 3 in a row? You beat Boise early in the year. Now you just pick off beating Florida. Now you have what seems to be at the moment a Death Star in Miami. How did that happen? How did the upset happen? Well, Byron Brown has to play the game of his life. And last week wasn't necessarily the cleanest game. It was very low scoring, 18-16. If you were to tell yourself that before the game started, you would not think that was a real score, or at least you wouldn't imagine South Florida would win that game scoring below 20 points. But it happened. But I think for South Florida, one of the things too, with USF and this sort of, the Baylor Brile stuff, and with the offense, they run the veer and shoot. They run the ball effectively. Again, so this was the Tennessee preview. Again, a lot of folks get confused that they think, this, South Florida, the Baylor Brile stuff that Tennessee and like USF runs is, it's air raid, it's Mike Leach stuff. Well, it's not really. They can throw the ball when they want to. Certainly they have, the wide receiver splits and the whole, adage they use is, hey, with the receivers, you're close enough to the sideline where they can literally spit on it. They can all do that, but they really run the ball a lot. It's sort of like the whole thing of killing the boar, because people think, killing the boar, air raid, and, run the ball for, all over the stadium. Well, no, they're much like them, and a veer and shoot. It's a run-based offense. They run the ball more than people think. So I expect Miami to obviously be prepared for a lot of running. I think Byron Brown will be a part of that. He's fully healthy. I think these are the type of games that you need him to, use his legs, which is his gift. The only problem with South Florida, this is sort of where the upset sort of falls apart, is that you have everyone's attention now, because now you beat Florida, you beat Boise State. Everyone has your attention now. You're not necessarily the underdog anymore. At least in my mind, I do expect, at least I think the folks over there in Coral Gables, they have your attention now, right? Because after, you beat Boise, cool, it's at home, it's at Ray J, it's a weird game, it's a Thursday night game. Okay, cool. You beat Florida, it's, whoa, like this has never hurt Willoughby in time before. You have to go back 17 years ago, back to 2007, but at least in the modern era of, modern college football, it hasn't happened in a long time. And I think for Miami, I think you've gotten their attention, at least I think. I think a lot of us could said the same thing about that with Florida, and obviously they didn't get that. At least they didn't get the memo. But I think what sort of pulls apart here, what would make this upset happen here is the wide receivers for USF versus the safeties for the safeties and corners, really that whole secondary for Miami. That's to me is the matchup I'm more fascinated with. If running the ball can work, the running game just doesn't. It's not working. Miami's clogging it up, and then whole new defensive staff there in Coral Gables is able to figure it out pretty quickly. That could be a challenge. That could be a challenge for South Florida, and they need their receivers to at that point step up. And if that happens, I don't think South Florida really has receivers that can expose any flaws, if any, in the Miami secondary. I just don't think they can. They could, but this is a very low chance. Now, the other, side of this, for Miami to pull off the upset, is that I don't believe that the whole staff there, the whole defensive staff there, I don't think they've ever faced veer and shoot before. So this is a very new thing they've ever faced. So this is totally new territory for them, I believe. So this is the first time they've ever faced it with Corey Heverman coming in there. So that's interesting too, right? Have they ever faced that's sort of a question that, the folks on Cover 3, regarding Tennessee, especially with what's the new, or if they're facing a new coaching staff, it's, the question I think Bud always brings up is, hey, have they ever faced the veer and shoot before? Use that as a sort of way to sort of look through their archives, why not, and go through the number crunching. And as far as I can tell, again, I don't think this whole defensive staff there has ever faced this offense before. So if you're South Florida, or if you're just rooting for the upset in general, that should be in your favor, I guess, that they have never faced this type of offense before. So that, I guess that's a good sign. But as much as I would love to see this to happen, look, as a statistic, this will be great. You have Miami and Florida taking losses before they both play each other and before Miami plays Florida State here in about a month. Absolute cinema. So as much as I would like that to happen, as much as it'll be as fun as it'll be, it's on the CW. It's already got, sickos are written all over it. I just don't think it's going to happen. At least I don't think it's going to happen again. But I will say this, I have Miami win the game, unless they are, look, they are 17.5-point favorites for a reason because they're at home. It's the talent thing. Even despite all of that, I think South Florida will represent themselves well. This is sort of, again, another Super Bowl they have circled. This will be a close game. So I have Miami winning, but it's not going to be – they won't win by 17.5. I think this will be a very competitive game. I think the fact that this whole defensive staff there hasn't really faced the veer and shoot before – that has me a little concerned. So that's why I do believe there will be some things that Alex Lesh and that brain trust there will try to do to, really throw off the scent of the Miami coaching staff down there. I think it could work. So I think, I think Miami will win. I think USF will cover. It's a bold move on my part, I'll say, but I like the I like the chances of this being a very interesting game, and certainly, if you're at the CW. Outside of, again, the DC Arrowverse shows that you guys used to air, this is probably going to be the highest viewed event in your network's history. So, golf clap for the CW on that part. I'm going to take a quick little break here. Again, nothing happening for audio or anything like that. Get some water real quick, then we'll move on to the upset alerts. And like I just said earlier, it may not seem like this is a week where the upset alerts should be elevated, but trust me, there's some games that I'm watching very closely. So. Again, if you are new here, which I think most of you are, if you're watching this, no one's watching this live right now, but if you're listening to this on the replay on Spotify, just be sure you make sure you subscribe. It's very simple. I'm not asking for much. Don't knock on your door or whatever, or force you to sign a form or send you stuff through your mail, your physical mail, your email, or text you and whatnot. This show's offer all this information that you can get, at least from our show, both whether it's college football, Marvel, Star Wars, Buccaneer stuff. All of it's free. Like my predictions, all that stuff's all free, all available to you with no cost at all. So we'll never debt to you guys. I would never have you guys go through a paywall or go through a Patreon page. Everything is completely free of charge. So. Upset alerts, week 3 edition. Last week was a very interesting week per se. A lot of highly elevated games because it was in some people's terms, a very quiet Saturday, but it turned out to be a surprise Saturday for some. Us here, not so much. But week 3, wow, there's not a lot of games that you would say, hey, this would qualify as an upset. While it might be true, don't ever always assume that an upset can't happen, or at least have interest in some of these games, or at least be aware that the upset could happen. So that's what this segment is for, is to make you aware of, well, it may not seem like that on the surface, when you look at the dynamics and, where is the game on the schedule, what's the emotional part of it, a lot of weird things happen in college football. It's like Josh Pate has said in the past, welcome to college football. So first game here, I bet you no one's talking about this game. Auburn versus South Alabama. I'm concerned about this game. It's in the yellow category. Maybe think to yourself, well, what are you talking about, Josh? What are you talking about? South Alabama, Auburn. Auburn's won that game by 100. Well, much like the next game I'm talking about, Auburn has Oklahoma on deck. And they're playing South Alabama, a in-state school. And knowing what we saw last week with South Florida going to Florida, and everyone just assumed, oh, yeah, in-state school, G5 team, Florida should be able to take care of them. Words of Lee Corso, not so fast, and they lost. If you're Auburn, that South Florida game should scare you because this has that written over it. And what also makes it even more interesting is that, South Alabama, head coach that Major Applewhite, I know a lot of folks sort of hate him, especially if you're like a Houston Cougar fan. South Alabama was very competitive with Tulane last week, and that's not something to really sneeze at. That's kind of a big deal. And I know for sure, with any of these small games, again, referencing South Florida and Florida, any of these small interstate schools, whether it's schools in Florida or Georgia or whatever, these smaller schools, at least I don't know this officially, but from what I can tell, these schools I guarantee you would love. And they foam at the mouth at the opportunity to play these big schools these big schools in their state. And what's really interesting here, just from a historical standpoint, is that Auburn, both them and Alabama, really avoid playing these teams. Like UAB, Troy, South Alabama is sort of, you have to do the research on. I've done it before, but it's just sort of this weird sort of, ulterior motive. They don't want to face them because they think, oh man, if we lose to these guys, it'll be so embarrassing. It's sort of like I don't know what you call it, a class warfare in college football, but this is a rare moment. And I think for South Alabama, this is their Super Bowl, and this is their opportunity to do, again, sort of do what South Florida did last week to Florida and say, hey, you may be the big school in your state, but we exist too. And you guys for a long time never tried to play us, but here we are. You guys invited us to your house. We're coming in. We're going to represent. And for Auburn, again, it's the look-ahead thing. It's, again, apparently they're wearing their white uniforms at home for the first time in like 20 years or whatever, which is really weird. So I guess now Auburn's LSU now. Okay, cool. So not only with the uniform thing, with Auburn wearing their away jerseys at home and it being a whiteout, and this game to me, this is weird. And I have a feeling this game to me is gonna be very, very weird, and I'm concerned. So this one is in the yellow category, almost put in the red, but I don't know. I just don't like it when any of these smaller in-state schools play the big schools, and especially when it's a look ahead thing. This game, something feels weird about it. So whether it's the fact that Auburn is playing South Alabama, and the fact that Auburn's wearing their away jerseys at home, which is, again, just kind of like, okay. So, yeah, that game has to be concerned. And this next one also has to be concerned because, as I just mentioned, Auburn plays Oklahoma. Oklahoma is going to, or at least this weekend, they're going to Philadelphia. For what you may ask, are they going there to visit the Liberty Bell or go visit the art museum there or whatnot? No, they're playing a football game against Temple at Lincoln Financial Field. This also concerns me. And much like the South Alabama game, this game also has this weirdness run all over, and no one's talking about it. Now, I mean, I think folks talked about it back in the summer. I think Josh Pate talked about it. And yes, I agree with him. It is weird that they're going to play Temple on the road. I mean, I get it. It's, your donor base and your alumni base is all over the country. And, it's an opportunity to, to have the fans travel to Philadelphia, one of the bigger cities in the Northeast. I get that part, but just why? But this also concerns me for, again, much like the same reasons with Auburn. It's a weird look-ahead spot. You're on the road. You're coming off a huge win over Michigan. You're feeling good about yourself. You're very into press clippings. You're riding the high of the wave here. But as someone who coming from someone who doesn't surf, as they always say, with the wave, that also comes with the potential of drowning. So could Oklahoma drown in their own success? Could the Temple Owls pull off one of the biggest upsets of the college football season? Could. It's in the yellow category. I'm watching it. Very, very concerned here for both these Auburn and Oklahoma. Very, very concerned here. This next one, no real concern here. I think a lot of folks kind of, and this, I had a feeling this would happen, but again, another game that everyone's really talking about, maybe outside of the state of Alabama and Wisconsin. Bama hosts Wisconsin this weekend for the first time in over 10 plus years that a Big Ten team is going to Bryant-Denny Stadium. I think the last team to do it was Penn State with Joe Paterno, his final full year as a head coach. And then, of course, all the whole off-the-field scandal happened. This game, I don't think is going to be very competitive here. I know a lot of folks still don't trust Bama, and they still have the Florida State result baked in their minds, and that's totally understandable. But given where Wisconsin is right now, look, is there a path for Wisconsin to pull off the upset? Of course there is. It's very marginal. It's very, very small. But I think Bama should be able to flex their muscles here. They get Ryan Williams back. Jan Miller might play, and they may end up playing him just so that he gets, kind of in game shape and getting reps in games. And plus they have a bye week too, so it's not like, hey, if he gets a little bit more banged up, he can rest another week before they go on the road to Athens. So I kind of expect Bama to flex their muscles here. But then again, I said that about the Florida State game, and everyone, including me, got egg on their face. So I almost put this in the yellow category, but it was a borderline of yellow, green. So we're watching it, but I'm not too concerned about it. This next one I'm very concerned about, and no one's talking about it too. Again, a lot of these games no one's talking about. Like besides the Bama Wisconsin game, no one's talking about some of these games. And this one really concerns me. Arkansas playing Ole Miss. Ole Miss is at home. Ole Miss is coming off of a very, I know the score doesn't indicate it, but a very physical game against Kentucky. Yet again, Austin Simmons had a lot of turnovers, and plus there's the injury thing. I think he should be playing this weekend, but we'll see on that for sure. I think he is, but I know he's banged up last week. But regardless, quarterback injury or not, you have turnover issues with him. He's had like 4 turnovers in the first 2 games, and that's like the first time in Ole Miss history, I believe. Like a lot of just bad turnover luck. Now they play Arkansas, who is 2-0, kind of, resting a little bit. They play 2 G5, where they played an FCS team and a G5 in Arkansas State, feeling pretty good about themselves. Now they get to face, they get to face a Ole Miss team that is kind of rattled right now. And listen, man, I know a lot of folks don't watch all of Arkansas football. I do a little bit when I can. Taylor Green is a very underappreciated quarterback. He's, kind of got that. He's a taller kid, but he can run around and do some interesting stuff. And plus, you still have, the great Mike Petrino, great in quotation marks. He's still there calling plays. Ole Miss, again, sort of a fragile team. They're coming off a very physical game, and I think they're rewarded with playing Arkansas. I don't like it. And I think the upset here could definitely happen. And, boy, if that were to happen here, Arkansas 3-0, probably cracking the top 25. Who had that in their bingo card? So, how about that? Actually, I forgot to add in a game here real quick. Forgot one, actually. I just remembered. Let's see here. Yeah, I forgot to. I made a mistake in the spelling here, so I kind of ruined the vibe here. All right, back on track here. I just added something in there. So that one in the red, that's a code red. So again, if you're new here, I guess I should have done this at the beginning. Let me do our system here. Instead of doing numbers, you do colors. So like think of like a traffic light. So green, go. All systems are go here. No upset going to happen. Yellow, we're watching it. And then, of course, the red is we're very concerned. So that game we're concerned about. Do you guys know who USC plays? They played Purdue. What do you think they're playing them at? Home, maybe? Good advantage for them, right? No, it's on the road. It's in West Lafayette. I'm concerned about this game because of the travel. I know everyone, talks about, the travel. They're professional players now. They're getting paid. They should deal with it. I don't care. These are 18 and 22-year-olds. Most of these kids on USC's roster, I've probably never heard of West Lafayette. Probably even been to the state of Indiana before. I'm concerned. Even though, yes, Purdue is one of the worst P4 teams in the country, they're 2-0, and with Barry Odom, and this young, I think you see this a lot in college football. You have these young coaching staffs and these new staffs. They always, have a game circled as their Super Bowl or a big game. This is their big game. And for USC, the talk was, hey, they're against that Illinois game with undefeated, and it was going to be a huge game for them. Don't lose to Purdue on the road, because that would be very embarrassing. And then if that were to happen, that would get the whole conversation about Lincoln Riley in the hot seat. So, the travel thing concern. Your first Big Ten game concern. The fact that it's Purdue's Super Bowl, kind of concern. I'm watching it. And I'll be, watching and listening to this very closely here. So that one, it's in the yellow category. Concerned about that game. This next game, Northwestern versus Oregon. Northwestern's hosting Oregon. Some people are wondering here, so Oregon's playing Northwestern. Everyone knows that Northwestern has this, that practice field they're playing up as they're getting their new stadium built. But, in the past, and including last year, Northwestern, when they played the bigger brands, like Ohio State, for example, that was at, Wrigley Field, I believe. So, they didn't usually play, or they didn't play in these bigger brands at their practice field on the lake. And a lot of folks, I think, going into this year, or who have looked at the schedule, are probably assuming, so they're playing this game at Soldier Field because the Bears are maybe out of town or something. This game is at the practice field, and that's a real thing. I'm concerned here. I'm concerned because, again, much like I just mentioned with Purdue, this is a Super Bowl opportunity here, or a big game opportunity here for Northwestern, a team that, again, they have as much home field advantage as you can have, but what I think is interesting about this is that it's a very unique thing for Oregon, right? It's going to the the practice field. It's on the lake. It's very windy because you're on the lake of and I know I'm not to get into the whole meteorology side of things here, but because of the lake being there's a lot of wind there, and all of the science and whatnot that goes into that. But just the fact that it's a weird location. It's it's a noon kickoff again. Not a big fan of these West Coast teams now going across the Mississippi River. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit concerned here. Now, look, Dan Lang and them could definitely go in there and skull drug Northwestern like they did with Oklahoma State. They could. Or, on the other hand, Northwestern can see this and say, hey, opportunity here, right? Get this thing righted. We know we got routed by Tulane, and, it was very ugly with the off-the-field stuff. But, we could right the ship here, and we could, we're hosting Oregon at our little practice field. And, by the way, the spectacle of this is going to be insane. And there's been a lot of talk too about, back, what was it, last year during Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis, where they had Oregon, the university brought in that inflatable puddles duck. It was on the river there. And there's been a lot of talk about them doing that. That's probably not feasible given the wind and whatnot. But this is going to be really amazing to watch, man. Just the fact that you're having Oregon playing at this puny little practice field, and no one's talking about it. And the fact that, you're not going to have a lot of fans there because the stadium's so small. Again, much like the Auburn and Oklahoma games, this one, too, is just a very weird vibe around it, and no one's talking about it. So this one, I'm a little bit concerned about. It's in the yellow category. So we're watching that one. This next one, again, no one's talking about. Utah playing Wyoming. Where are you playing at? Salt Lake City, it's at home, the home vibes, another opportunity to get a nice, comfortable win there for Kyle Winningham Company. No, it's on the road in Laramie. And a place, as Chip Patterson says, it's it's windy in Laramie. It's on the road, and yes, it's not that much of an advantage for Wyoming because Utah does play also, in the mountains as well, in the Rocky Mountains. But all that being said, a lot of those kids, I would imagine, have never been to Laramie before, and a lot of those folks have never experienced that. And look, you can say all the things about Wyoming as of right now in the past year or so. They've certainly been worse than they have been in the last couple of years with the coaching change and whatnot. Still a dangerous place to play at. And again, go ask Texas Tech a couple years ago. They were a ranked team, I believe, and they fell on their face in Laramie. So don't ever have anyone tell you, or at least tell me, hey, going to Laramie is, it's not hard going to Laramie anymore and playing Wyoming. Even as bad as they've been, it's still, look, if I was a Utah fan, I'm concerned. I'm not totally concerned, but I'm kind of concerned. So this one is in the yellow category. I am watching this one very closely. This one, the one I added in, I totally forgot this is happening. Last one here. Iowa State, coming off that huge win over Iowa, first home win there in a long time. They're playing Arkansas State at home. No, they're going to Jonesboro. I'm concerned about this game. Again, this is another game where you look at it, I guess generically, if you're not a college football sicko like me, you probably go, you're Iowa State, Arkansas State, whatever, not watching it. Are you sure about that? Because again, much like we talked about with, some of these other games we talked about, especially the Auburn and Oklahoma games respectively, they're the two teams they're playing. I think a lot of folks don't understand that this this is a very unique spot here for Butch Jones and Arkansas State. If they're to pull this off, it's a 20.5-point spread against weird locations, one of those weird scenarios where, the big school in your region is coming down to play you. Again, just really weird. And this, also despite the fact that Iowa State's coming off of the big physical game, are they ready to face the Butch Jones team and the champions of life? I know all the things I just said there is sort of meme material, but no, realistically, I'm a little concerned here. So this game's in the L category. Again, a game that no one's talking about. I'm concerned about it. So I'll be watching that game very closely. So yeah, upset alerts. Again, a lot of games on here, but no, besides maybe one or two, no one's talking about them, which is a recipe for disaster because no one's talking about them. Then come late Saturday night and Sunday, everyone's going, man, how did Auburn lose to South Alabama? How did Iowa State lose to Arkansas State? How did Utah lose to Wyoming? Well, you should listen to my show. Real quick here. Well, not real quick. Real quick in terms of getting some water. So I'm gonna get some water real quick, and then we'll touch on Texans versus Buccaneers. Then we'll wrap up the show. So the college football talk is done for now. So we will, again, as a little reminder, we will be doing our reaction show Saturday night after all the games, at least the major games are over with. So after the conclusion of Florida LSU, we will go live and recap some of the games from the weekend, at least college football wise. But NFL Buccaneers. So of course, they get the win on the road at Atlanta last week. As goofy as I was. They play on the road again. Their reward is they play the Texans on the road. If you're wondering why they're playing the Texans and not the rest of the NFC South, it's because the way the matchups work. So Tampa is playing that divisional leader of that, at least a similar type. I think that's how it works, like a similar type of team from that past year in terms of like conference record and whatnot, divisional record. So that's why they're playing the Texans and not everyone else. So the AFC division they're playing this year is the AFC East. So, but they do play the Texans this year. And it's on the road. This game, according to the FanDuel line, the Texans are a 2.5-point favorite. Makes sense. Your Texans are at home. They're sort of in wounded Texan mode. I know most of you, or especially NFL fans, are definitely watching that Houston Rams game. Not very inspiring type of game. Defensively, I thought both teams were okay, but in terms of the offense, I guess for Tampa, if they were to win this game, which there's a good chance they could because the line's very, very small here, despite it being at home. The thing that Tampa has the advantage here, or at least matchup wise, is their defensive line with Kalijah Kancey, Vita Vea, and that whole group there, versus the Texans O-line, which I was hearing throughout the whole spring and summer that that whole O-line was very very poor. They were showing crack. The cracks were showing last year or last season. I think it's been, at least for one week, it's been valued a little bit. There's certainly concerns there. They can't protect CJ Stroud. And look, CJ, in terms of going from upgrade in terms of quarterback you're facing, this is an upgrade. CJ, last time Tampa played him, that was probably the first time Bob Fuchs probably got reintroduced to him, at least in the NFL, at least in NFL circles. In that wild game like 3 years ago now, I believe, 2 to 3 years ago. And of course, Tampa's back at the scene of the crime. And it's on Monday Night Football. And by the way, this Monday night game, it's actually not Joe Buck and Troy. It's going to be Chris Fowler, Darren Orlovsky, Louis Riddick, who I'm big fans of. Them, Katie George will be there, I believe, and Peter Schrager, Positive Peter, as they call him. So, yeah, it'll be that crew. And then Joe and Troy are calling the late game. It's ESPN's doing the double headers again now, no longer throwing the games on ESPN Plus. So how about that? This game, by the way, starting earlier this week. So it's at 7:30 Eastern, not 8 o'clock because they're doing the doubleheader thing. But how about that having the college folks doing an NFL game? Always love seeing. I always love having Chris Fowler and those guys doing college and NFL. So how about that for Chris doing two big games in 1 week and actually having a good quality NFL games. This should be a good game, I think. But yeah, for Tampa, the advantage they have clearly is the defensive line versus the O-line. But my concern here for Tampa is they're facing a much better quarterback than they faced last week, and even last week with Michael Penix. Despite that loss, I was very impressed coming off that game in Penix. He operated the offense well. They did a lot of things that I think Tampa got a little bit confused in. And I would assume that D'Amico Ryans and that whole staff there, just I would imagine, are probably looking at Tampa and saying, look, hey, we don't match up with them with our line, but if we can if we can get just a reasonable protection, right? If we can, let's protect C.J. Stroud enough to where that defensive line and Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey and friends aren't, constantly penetrating our own line and getting to the backfield and putting C.J. Stroud on the ground all the time. If they can do that, they can do some damage. Because Tampa's defense, as I said, after their game and during the game last Sunday, look, it wasn't. Everyone was talking about after the preseason saying, "Oh man, the Bucs secondary looks so much improved." And me during the whole preseason was like, I don't think one preseason is going to change the whole secondary. I still don't think it's that good, and it's still not that good, and I'm still concerned about it. And that look, you're facing a much better quarterback this week, someone who's more of a veteran than Penix, and that you're concerned about it. But given where Tampa is right now, and I think if you look at the whole, situation with the Texans O-line, if it really is that bad, I think that should be the difference in the game here. And again, you have, in terms of these two quarterbacks to watch, I think it's a very fascinating matchup with Stroud and Baker, sort of going at each other's defense. And I think for Tampa, for them to really, something at least I think they'll emphasize this week is probably getting the ground game going just a little bit better, better traction with it. Last week they didn't really do that much. I think, like I said on Tuesday, I think Bucky Irving had 3 or 4 decent runs. Wasn't a good output from them. Also, I guess for Tampa, the concern I do have is going with some of these rookies, right? Especially with Ibuka. And look, Ibuka looked great last week. Very, very impressive out of all the rookies last week. But again, like I mentioned on the preview show, and I think I mentioned this on Tuesday too, at some point you're going to have a game where Ibuka's going to make a mistake. He's still young, right? He's still young. He's a rookie. He hasn't played a whole lot in the NFL, at least meaningfully, especially in meaningful games. There will be mistakes to be made here at some point during the season. I don't know if it's this week or going forward, but that's something to keep an eye on. But obviously he'll be a factor. Mike Evans, the whole receiver core, is definitely going to be one of the better ones that Houston will have faced all year, I think. So because of, again, those whole O-line issues for the Texans, and I think Tampa's D-line is definitely the strength here for the defense, I think Tampa is going to win this game somehow, some way. No thoughts on the money line at all, but I think Tampa wins, and I think it's going to be interesting to see because they get, I believe, the Jets after this, and they get the Eagles coming to town. So how about that? Wanted to, remind you guys real quick, and then we have a little something to talk about here at the very end. Nothing to do with the show or anything. The show's kind of over, but reminder again, we'll have a show, a reaction recap show on Saturday nights. Be sure to tune in after the Florida LSU game, and then of course we'll have our Tuesday show. We'll just have to be later in the evening on Tuesday, and then we should be back to normal this time next week. But I just want to let you guys know on that. So again, make sure to subscribe, like the streams, the videos, follow us on Spotify, whatnot, Twitter, X. And again, this show's completely free. We would never put the thing behind the paywall or anything like that. Never talked to an advertiser before. Look, if there's an advertiser out there that would be willing to work with us, my DMs are open. So finally, I wanted to end the show today with a little message, if you will. As most of you know, a lot has happened in the past 24 to 48 hours here domestically in the U.S. and also abroad in Europe. But I wanted to address our audience in the U.S. specifically. This great nation of ours has, had its fair share of major events, and of course, today's the anniversary of one of those major events. Even though I wasn't, around to witness and experience what happened 24 years ago, I do know this: Americans will prevail. We will show our courage, even in our darkest times. I think that is something that a lot of us can. I think all of us can sort of look at, right? Given what has transpired over the past 24 and I guess 48 hours or so. So I just wanted to end on that little message there. I know this show is not usually political and whatnot. We don't get into real world events, but it's been a very tough 24 or 48 hours, both here domestically and also abroad as well in Europe. I know a lot of things happening there that are warranting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. But yeah, that's our show for today. And enjoy the games this weekend. If Again, we'll be back on Tuesday next week. So until then, take care of yourselves and each other, and thank you.